Hello everyone, this is Zikiziel, and tonight I'll be reacting to Changeling the Dreaming Lore, The History of the Fae by Lazar of Stygia. Before I begin, and I'd like to mention that if any of you are watching this and don't know about Lazar's channel, I recommend his content, and there will, as always, be a link to the original video and to his channel in the description box below. I would also like to apologize for not uploading for several days, but I've been feeling rather awful, among other things. But with that out of the way, let us begin.
Welcome to this video on the history of the Fae and Changelings from the tabletop role-playing game Changeling the Dreaming. You may wonder why I used both terms. All Changelings are Fae, to some degree, but not all Fae are Changelings, as will become clear later on. The Fae are the creations of a realm called the Dreaming, a magical place where imagination and being are one and the same.
Imagination and being one and the same sounds a lot like the warp, where the thoughts and emotions of people in the material world end up becoming manifest as things such as demons.
In the Mythic Age, or the time of legends, the Dreaming existed alongside the mortal world, and the Fae could pass freely from one realm into the other without issue. The Fae taught mortals the art of dreaming, and found that mortals' dreams and imaginations were so vivid that they could be used as fuel and material for the Fae's arts, both in the mortal world and in their homeland of Arcadia, the greatest kingdom within the Dreaming. The Fae would, from time to time...
I have a feeling where this is going, and it's going to involve humans essentially becoming livestock to harvest dreams from.
wrap themselves in the substance produced from dreams, called glamour, and appear before mortals, because they themselves were naturally formless, fluid creatures limited only by their whims. When they presented themselves to mortals, mortals often mistook them for gods, or monsters. The first and most powerful of the Fae etched themselves into the mortal consciousness for all times as the Tuatha De Danann, the people of Danu. The Tuath were the firstborn, from whom all other Fae on earth descend. Some fickle Fae found it easy to regard mortals as little more than livestock, sheep to be sheared for their dreams, and occasionally terrorized to give their dreams, or nightmares rather, a unique flavor. These malicious Fae then left their victims with their souls ravaged beyond repair. This seems to be a running theme with the supernaturals in the world of darkness. They abuse mortals with their power, and then mortals, some consciously and some unconsciously, not only drive said supernaturals into hiding, but try to create a world in which the existence of the supernatural becomes impossible.
By the way, while this is very similar to things that, to my knowledge, vampires have done, the whole thing of those with power abusing those who don't have it, that's a very human thing to do, and has been done by humans to other humans since time immemorial. So it's not really something unique to the supernatural. Although the whole thing of, the results of it being where humans create a world where the supernatural struggles to exist, that's definitely a unique consequence. Although it can also kind of be seen like as the backlash against the abuse, like what happens in human societies, where once the oppressed become the ones in power, where there is often a desire for revenge, if history is any indication.
Among the legends of the Fae is Lilith, a fairy who was so intoxicated by the taste of human blood, it became all that she could consume forevermore. Another is a legend of a group of Fae who became...
I wonder if Lilith has anything to do with vampires. But then again, if I remember the Jewish mythology correctly, because I've heard a little bit about it, Lilith was Adam's first wife before Eve, and ended up becoming a demon or something. I wonder how that might factor into this.
Became obsessed with wolves until they lost their ability to change shapes into anything other than a wolf. Or
is this going to be where werewolves come from?
Or some variation of one. During the Mythic Age, mortals had little defense against the Fae, who could invade their dreams and shape them as they pleased. But humans discovered two weapons against the children of the dreaming. The first and most blatant was the creation of cold iron, a substance utterly lethal to the Fae due to its banal nature, its spiritual and elemental inflexibility. Cold iron is poison to the creatures of the dreaming, as much as silver is the bane of werewolves, or fire is the doom of vampires. The other, and perhaps more dangerous development, was the concept of banality. Banality is disbelief, the ability of mortals to doubt their own senses, to cordon off one's own mind from things that contradict what a person supposedly knows to be true, to protect their own identity against outside threats. It also has the effect of stripping the glamour from the world that the Fae require simply to exist. This period in the history of the Fae is known.
So kind of like just going, this does not make sense to me, thus I will not believe that this exists. And by essentially denial, robbing the Fae of the sustenance that they would otherwise get from the dreams of mortals. Reminds me a lot, actually, of the Emperor of Mankind in Warhammer 40k and his plan to create a secular society and rob the Chaos Gods of power by denying them worship.
Known as the Sundering. Its beginning corresponds with the Iron Age in human history. The dreaming and the mortal world drifted away from each other as civilization developed, first in Mesopotamia, then spread outward. Those Fae who did not retreat to the dreaming immediately traveled away from the cradle of civilization to less hostile regions, where glamour still flowed more or less freely, and banality was not so strong. These fairy kingdoms, or freeholds, became oases of glamour in an ever-growing desert of banality.
Yeah. Given that more and more of the world has become secular by the modern day, I am expecting that there's a veritable drought of glamour, or that's going to hit the Fae sometime around the Industrial Revolution, perhaps.
The most powerful of the fairy kingdoms was Tir na Nog. As mortal society stratified, so too did Fae society. Fairy chiefs became fairy kings and queens, warriors became knights, and kingdoms became fiefs and estates. As mortal nations warred, so too did the Fae, who had not escaped as far from the dreams of mortals as they liked to imagine. The sundering between the dreaming and the mortal world culminated in an event called the Shattering, when the ties between the two realms finally broke. 1347 marks the beginning of...
Also, the way the Fae and their behavior are a mirror, in a way of what humans are doing with the declaring war on each other and the stratification of societies, creating titles such as king, queen, knights, etc. I wonder if this or Warhammer, like one or the other, drew inspiration from the other regarding the whole thing of the warp for Warhammer and the dreaming for A World of Darkness. I don't know which one is older, but the similarities is seem too strong to be coincidental.
Of both the shattering as well as the outbreak of the Black Plague. Death, fear, and despair spread throughout Europe and echoed in the dreaming, snapping the already slender threads tying the realm of the Fae and the realm of men. As humans sought safety in the arms of the Church, or in the nascent movement towards rationalism, the Fae made choices of their own to ensure their survival in an increasingly hostile world. Many of the Fae, who had set themselves up as the nobility of their kind, known as the Sidhe, retreated through the gateways and paths back to Arcadia, in some cases having to fight their way through the trods against hostile Fae who never left the realm. Others who dwelt in the fairy kingdoms enacted sorcerous rituals that would cut off their freeholds from the outside world completely, ensuring that banality could not enter, but that they also could not leave. These Fae became known as the Lost Ones. The fairy commoners, largely abandoned by their so-called nobility in the harsh mortal world, were forced to go a third path, the Changeling Way. The commoner Fae, along with a handful of nobles who either could not or would not escape to Arcadia, learned how to wrap their spirits in a protective layer of glamour, and then banality, and conceal themselves in human forms, in the same sense as an astronaut puts on a spacesuit to protect themselves from the cold vacuum of outer space. This was a temporary measure, as the Changeling Way was perfected, in the form of implanting their own Fae souls within mortal infants, without displacing the child's soul.
So they're implanting their souls into an infant without removing the child's soul in the process. I wonder then, do the two souls end up merging into one, or is it a case where the Fae essentially has tethered themselves to their own food source?
The price for this method of survival is that the changeling might pass through early life, or even multiple lifetimes without ever awakening to their true nature. As the Silver's Gate in the Court of All Kings, the last doorway to Arcadia slammed shut, the remaining Fae on Earth, the changelings, entered a new period of their history, the Interregnum. As society entered a period of renewed interest in science and reason, then exploration and invention, the changelings underwent similarly eventful changes and discoveries. The disappearance of their nobility and the social structure they had built left the commoners struggling to find community and purpose. Some took to the open roads as vagabonds, merchants, actors, minstrels, magicians, bandits, and the like. Some found places in the towns and burgs. Others banded together and formed changeling communities of their own. The system of feudalism with its ties of vassalage was familiar, and a few commoners set themselves up as lords and ladies of the abandoned freeholds in the absence of the Sidhe. Most changelings worked out new ways to govern themselves and created new customs and traditions, or borrowed them from the outcasts of mortal society, such as circus folk or criminals. Before the shattering, the greatest rivalry among the Fae was between the courts of the Seelie and the Unseelie.
Them adopting cultural traits from exiles and criminals, that gives the impression that the Fae, in terms of, well, among specifically the changelings, it gives the impression that essentially their culture would end up transforming into some, like, essentially an amalgamation of what would have been considered fringe in the various societies among humans. End up taking from people like say the Romani.
The Seelie ruled the Fae during the spring and summer seasons, reveling in the beauty and pageantry of life and growth. The Unseelie ruled during the fall and winter seasons and honored the necessities of entropy and death. These two courts, and their ceremonial transfers of power during the feasts of Beltane and Samhain respectively, represented the endless cycle of life and death, growth and decay, fertility and fallowness. With the shutting of the gates to Arcadia, the remaining Seelie and Unseelie changelings set aside their ancient rivalries in the name of survival. The resulting agreement, the Compact, ceased all hostilities between the courts for the duration of the crisis. Seelie court territories admitted unseelie changelings, and vice versa. This mixing of behaviors and morals created a new social blending, as changelings adopted certain customs and norms as suited them.
Sounds like as a side effect of of the shattering, they ended up forming a more unified society, because as is a common thing, when unity is required for survival, people will generally band together for mutual interest.
As the changelings huddled in the little pockets of safety and glamour they could find against a world increasingly dominated by the cold sterility of logic and science, many feared that a new spring would never come again, and whispered that an endless winter had come that would not only mean the end of the Fae, but of life itself. Then on July 26, 1961, the world watched as men, in defiance of what had been thought possible just a decade before, walked on the surface of the moon. A collective sense of awe and wonder flooded the world with glamour, briefly overcoming the banality of centuries. This was enough for the gates of Arcadia to blast open for a moment. Freeholds lost since the shattering reappeared in all of their ancient glory, fueled by the fresh glamour of humanity's dreams of walking among the stars. And the Sidhe, the shining host, returned from Arcadia, but not in glory. These Sidhe, for reasons they could not recall, had been exiled from the dreaming as punishment. Their memories had been wiped away as part of their exile.
So, essentially, the nobility that was living in the mortal realm, they fled back to the dreaming, specifically to Arcadia, in order to escape, leaving their subjects to fend for themselves. Something happened in there, because usually nobles don't just get exiled for no reason. I wonder if they tried to take over Arcadia after leaving their own holds.
Exile. Of the 13 great houses that departed during the shattering, only 5 returned: House Dougal, House Eluned, House Fiona, House Gwydion, and House Liam. These Fey nobles had to act quickly to prevent the banality of the world from dissolving their Fey souls. They resorted to the ancient method of the nobility. Before the doors of Arcadia snapped shut again, they tore the souls of select mortals from their bodies and hurled them into the dreaming, then implanted their own souls in the empty vessels.
Oh, so instead of co-inhabiting like the changelings were doing, the ones whose holds materialized again after, and assuming these are the same, like when they mentioned freeholds rematerializing, I assume these are the same ones who essentially had sealed themselves off separately to avoid the banality, were the ones that popped up.
Other Sidhe adopted the changeling way, and carefully bound their souls into the bodies of infants, waiting to emerge from their chrysalis in all of their splendor. This event, called the Resurgence, occurred around the world, but the highest concentrations of the returned Sidhe were in Ireland, Britain, and the United States. As the Sidhe moved to reclaim their ancient holdings and establish new ones, they sent out the call to the commoners to return to their proper place, in service to their betters.
Oh boy. The rulers have returned, and just want to pick up where they left off, as if nothing has changed. I imagine that the changelings weren't too happy about the nobility who essentially abandoned them to fend for themselves, just coming back and wanting to rule over them again.
For the nobility, nothing had significantly changed, at least nothing that concerned them. For the commoners, 600 hard years had passed, and they had learned to live without the nobility. Some commoners returned to their master's feet. Others rejected the Sidhe, just as the Sidhe had rejected them during the shattering. A few
Called
nobles
it.
were sympathetic to the commoners, but the majority believed that the commoners needed to be harshly punished for their impudence of not wanting to be ruled. On May 1st, during the Feast of Beltane, the Sidhe summoned a group of commoner leaders on the pretense of negotiation. But what happened was the Night of Iron Knives. The commoner leaders were butchered by the Sidhe, and along with them, any hope of a peaceful resolution to the turmoil between commoner and noble.
I wonder if the knives were literally iron, considering what was mentioned about cold iron being immediately lethal to the Fae.
This was the beginning of the Accordance Wars. For 3 years, changelings warred with one another, leading to riots and gang violence among mortals. The commoners had forgotten many things, foremost being that the Sidhe were not some foppish, withered aristocracy. They had been fighting in Arcadia, perhaps for centuries, and had the advantage of not only martial experience, tactics, and organization, but the Sidhe also brought back weapons from Arcadia that could devastate their enemies in combat, such as wyverns and manticores.
Oh yeah, 'cause, he did mention earlier here that the Sidhe had to fight their way through other Fae in order to actually get into Arcadia in the first place. Well, I guess that explains why it is that they were exiled then, when the connection was reestablished.
The commander of the Sidhe forces was Lord Dafil of House Gwydion. His strategies and ferocity led the shining host to victory after victory, carving a path through the freeholds of the West Coast and working his way east until he arrived in Manhattan, where the commoners of the United States made their last desperate stand. On New Year's Eve, Dafil's forces clashed with the Eastland Troll Army and the 4th Trolls Common Infantry in the Battle of Greenwich. The fight started in the strawberry fields of Central Park and spread throughout the city, as the armies dissolved into pockets of street fighting, with the Trolls eventually getting the upper hand. Lord Dafil regrouped his forces at the Times Square subway station, but was mortally wounded by a cold iron blade. Before he died, Lord Dafil hurled his sword, Caliburn, the sword of the High King of the Fae, deep into the subway tunnels, and protected it with an enchantment to only reveal...
What is that? What is that thing next to him? Is that Chupacabra? Or Jersey Devil or something?
...itself to his rightful successor. The commoner forces searched for the blade, but they could not locate it. Detachments of redcaps and knockers scoured the streets looking for nobles to kill.
Wait, redcaps? Aren't redcaps supposed to be either those goblins that essentially need to kill someone regularly and then pour the blood onto their caps in order to survive? So goblins are Fae? Interesting.
Some noble childlings who had undergone the Changeling Way were fostered in New York by a Fae named True Thomas, the Grand Bard. 2 of his wards were David Ardry and his sister, Morwen. Thomas received word of Dafil's death and that bands of commoners were on the hunt for soft targets. Thinking to find safety in the last place that the commoners would bother to look, True Thomas took his charges to Times Square, the very heart of the enemy. But when they reached Times Square, a patrol of redcaps spotted Thomas and moved to kill him. David Ardry disappeared in the confusion of the New Year's Eve revelers, pulled by a powerful glamour into the subway tunnels beneath the city. Just as
the
True
sword!
Thomas and his wards were about to be killed, David reappeared, holding Caliburn, glowing with a golden light. He and Thomas fought off the redcaps. In the chaos of the melee, Thomas announced, to commoner and noble alike, that they were looking upon the one true king, David Ardry ap Gwydion. When the battle was over, True Thomas took David and the other children to Caer Lune, court of the Kingdom of Apples, ruled by the Grand Dame, Queen Mab of House Fiona. Rumors of David's claim to the prophesied seat of the High King reached the Queen of Apples long before the boy himself did. She scorned him when True Thomas presented David in her throne room and ordered both of them removed. But as her guards approached David, a chimerical gray griffin, the symbol of House Gwydion, materialized and enveloped David in its massive wings. True Thomas declared, under aegis of truth, that the son of the griffin and the sword that was lost had come together in the apple bower, just as the prophecy of the High King foretold. Queen Mab then recognized David Ardry as the rightful High King of the Fae. For the next 3 years, High King David, working from Queen Mab's court, worked to bring about the end of the Accordance War. A succession of nobles appeared before David, either to swear their allegiance and curry his favor, or challenge his fitness to rule. In contests of wits and arms, David bested them all. The commoners dreaded what the rise of a high king would mean for their failing resistance. But when David sent emissaries to them with offers of peace, and more importantly, fairness, he eventually won their trust. In the end of his long labor was the Treaty of Concord, signed on December 2, 1975. The treaty created the realm of Concordia and established David Ardry's right to rule as High King. It recognized the monarchs of the kingdoms comprising Concordia. It also guaranteed the right of representation for the commoners in the privy councils of the nobility, the right to freely petition the nobles with their grievances, and a certain number of offices for the commoners in the nobles' courts. The treaty also contained provisions for the creation of the Parliament of Dreams, to give commoners additional representation in David's new government. High King David ruled Concordia from his fortress of Terra Nar, built from his own dreams and glamour. When David was on campaign or a diplomatic
Sounds like an all-around great king, actually. In terms of, like, he's talented both mentally and in terms of combat. He's a fair ruler, or managed to actually unite the warring factions. I get the feeling that he's going to have a descendant or something that's going to muck up all of it.
mission, his sister Morwen ruled as regent in his absence. He was alternately known as the Lion of Tara, the Son of the Griffin, and the Commoners' King. In other parts of the world, the conflicts between nobles and commoners ended in different ways. In the realms of Eire, or Ireland, Albion, or England, Cymru, or Wales, and Hibernia, or Scotland, the Accordance War was known as the War of Ivy and was resolved by the Caledonian Compact between the She monarchs of those realms. The War of the Resurgence on the European continent was known as the 5 Years' War. In the Kingdom of Neustria, or France, the She outnumbered the commoners and brutally suppressed all anti-royalist uprisings or even sentiments. In the Low Countries, the She reclaimed their ancient holdings, but were so disgusted with the excesses of the Kingdom of Neustria, they quietly admitted commoner refugees to their freeholds. The greatest commoner success in the resurgence was in Central Europe. Unlike the Americans or Britons, the commoners of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Poland didn't wait around for the She to get their bearings or lure them into a massacre like Beltane. The commoners presented a united front, armed themselves with new weapons to counter the nobility, and after 5 years of hard battle, managed to expel most of the She into the Kingdom of Neustria. In 1974, the commoners formed the Galatian Confederation. The 5 Years' War bypassed the Scandinavian freeholds almost entirely. The commoners of those realms had long been royalists and welcomed their nobility back. The reason for this was that the nobility of the Isle of Snowflakes, the Kingdom of Dalarna, and Jutland, while claiming the right to rule, regarded their subjects as equals rather than servants, and even granted the commoners titles and rights similar to their own. After the turmoil of the Accordance Wars, it took another 5 to 10 years for tempers to sufficiently cool and for noble and commoner to settle into the new, or in some cases, old order of things. Yet some things never change. Just as with mortals, assassination is one of the many tools of statecraft. Queen Andalura of House Dougal was assassinated in 1985 with a poisoned arrow. High King David.
All these political assassinations they mentioned. Yeah, this sort of thing reinforces what I mentioned earlier about the phase behavior mirroring what mortals do. More than some of them may realize.
David, both out of sympathy and political calculation, took Andalura's infant daughter as his ward and heir apparent. This not only secured the succession, an important duty for any monarch, but strengthened the ties between House Gwydion and House Dougal. But things became complicated when Lady Ferelith Nemania of House Elunid arrived at Terra Nor from the Kingdom of Willows. Ferelith was the ward of King Maelig, sent to spy on High King David and Concordia. But when she first laid eyes on David, she fell in love with him. He likewise found excuses for her to join him in some of his royal duties and occasionally dine in private with him. David's sister Morwen, however, did not approve of David's blossoming love for Ferelith for political and, let's say, personal reasons. House Elunid was a rival to House Gwydion. As for the personal reason, the Sidhe were stripped of most of their memories of Arcadia. Most, but not all. One of the memories that Lady Morwen kept from her time in the Dreaming was that she and David had been lovers. Secretly, she desired David, but knew that it could never be. No Lannister funny business in Concordia. So Morwen was fiercely protective of David, loyal to him, and resented sharing her brother with anyone else. When David proposed to Ferelith, she knew the whispers in the court about her, that she was treacherous and a seducer, and that she meant to lead the High King astray. Ferelith agreed to marry David, but only if their ceremony was small, to combat the rumors against her. He in turn acceded to the request and made a demand of his own, that she rule Concordia as his High Queen and equal. She was surprised, but agreed.
I hope that those rumors aren't the type that have a kernel of truth to them.
Determined that she would do everything she could to ease the burden of rulership for him. After their wedding and Ferelith's coronation as High Queen, the royal couple embarked on a tour of Concordia to introduce the commoners to their new queen, as well as to shore up the bonds of loyalty between the High King and his lords. The first stop was the Kingdom of Willows in Atlanta, Georgia, Ferelith's home, ruled by King Maelig, who was not a supporter of David's egalitarian policies towards the commoners. During a ball thrown for the High King and Queen, David was kidnapped in the midst of the party's confusion. The High King's disappearance caused political chaos as the accusations flew fast and heavy between nobility and commoners alike. Following the disappearance of David Ardry, the Parliament of Dreams could not agree on who was David's lawful successor. Before, it would be the Princess Lenore of House Dougal, who, despite being a child, is backed by the significant power of Queen Mab and the Kingdom of Apples. Yet David had just had the poor judgment to name Ferelith his High Queen, and therefore equal claimant to the throne. Still others claimed that David's sister, Morwen, who had ruled Terra Nor as his regent and possessed the blood of House Gwydion, was the rightful ruler. The Parliament of Dreams collapsed as noble and commoner alike greeted the new millennium with sharpened blades.
This sounds very much reminiscent of the Warring Kingdoms period of China's history.
Some nobles desire the throne of the High King, or to be on the side of whoever claims it. Commoners support their own claimants to the throne, but a few recall the Accordance Wars quite sharply, and want to undo the Treaty of Concord, along with the Sidhe nobility. And in the shadows lurk other schemers, whose plots for the Fae extend beyond petty things like fiefs and titles and rights. The shadows feel the cold wind blowing and know that winter is coming, perhaps an endless winter. This has been an overview of the history of the Fae and Changelings. Next on my to-do list is a history of Wraiths, the Restless Dead. Quite honestly, my favorite game, probably even more so than Vampire the Masquerade. Thank you for listening. Until next time.
Yeah, so that was Changeling the Dreaming. It was a very interesting watch, actually. And I hope you all enjoyed watching it with me. And feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I greatly appreciate the engagement. But more importantly, I enjoy chatting with all of you guys and learning more about the World of Darkness. But for now, I'll be signing off, and I wish you all a wonderful Thanksgiving.